Rosana was reaching for the napkins to clean up her mistake when Andrew Justice stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just stood. The businessman was still mid-sentence. Something cruel about competent staff and proper breeding. When he finally noticed a shadow falling across his table, he looked up, and for the first time in 23 years, Daniel Shaw recognized a man whose life he'd destroyed. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel, and it reminds us that hope and second chances are universal languages. The Friday night rush at Miller's Diner moved like a river with too many rocks in it, constantly flowing but never smooth. Rosana Becker had been on her feet for 11 hours, and her lower back was sending up distress signals her brain was too tired to process. She'd taken this double shift because rent was due in 4 days, and her landlord didn't accept excuses, only cash. What she didn't know yet was that in exactly 7 minutes, her entire understanding of human decency would shatter like the water glass she was about to knock over. Andrew Justice sat in booth 7 with his daughter Lily, a stack of homework between them and the remains of their dinner pushed to the side. Lily was 9 years old and convinced that math was conspiracy invented by adults to torture children. She stared at the word problem in front of her like it was written in ancient hieroglyphics. "Dad, what even is a remainder?" she asked, twirling her pencil. Andrew smiled, but it was the kind of smile that carried weight behind it. "It's what's left over. When you can't divide something evenly, there's always something that doesn't fit." He paused, lost somewhere in his own head for a moment. Sometimes the remainder is the most important part. He was thinking about his own remainders, the pieces of his old life that didn't fit into this new one. 23 years ago, he'd been Andrew Shaw, rising star at Morrison Financial, married with a daughter on the way. Then Daniel Shaw, no relation, just a cruel coincidence of names, had accused him of insider trading. The accusation was false, but Daniel had manufactured evidence so convincing that Andrew's career evaporated overnight. But that was a story for another version of himself, one he'd buried so deep he sometimes forgot it existed. Across the restaurant, in booth 3, sat the kind of man who measured his worth in the cost of his watch. Daniel Shaw wore power like cologne, too much of it, applied in all the wrong places. He'd made his fortune in corporate acquisitions, which was a polite way of saying he bought struggling companies, gutted them, and sold off the pieces. Tonight, he was celebrating a particularly lucrative deal with 2 junior executives who laughed at his jokes with the desperation of people who needed their jobs. He didn't notice Rosana approaching with the water pitcher because he was too busy explaining why certain types of people lacked the discipline for success. What happened next occurred in slow motion, the way all life-changing moments do. Rosana's exhausted legs betrayed her. She stumbled slightly, and a single drop of water, barely a teaspoon's worth, splashed onto the crystal face of Daniel's $15,000 watch. For a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if this would pass without incident. It wouldn't. "Do you have any idea how much this watch costs?" Daniel's voice cut through the ambient noise like a knife through butter. "Of course you don't. People like you never do." He stood up, towering over Rosana, who had gone completely still. "Let me guess, you finished high school, barely. Probably have a kid or two you can't afford. This job is the best you'll ever do, and you can't even manage this without." "That's enough." Andrew's voice wasn't loud, but it carried. He'd spoken without thinking, an instinct buried deep rising to the surface like a drowning man grasping for air. Daniel turned, irritated at the interruption. "Excuse me? I'm having a private conversation with—" "No, you're humiliating someone who made an innocent mistake." Andrew was standing now, though he didn't remember deciding to stand. Lily watched her father with wide eyes, having never seen this version of him before. Daniel studied Andrew for a moment, his expression shifting from irritation to something else. Recognition flickered across his face like heat lightning on a distant horizon. "Do I know you?" And there it was, the question Andrew had been running from for 2 decades. But before he could answer, something inside him that had been dormant for 23 years woke up and stretched its claws. This man had taken everything from him: his career, his marriage, his name. His daughter had grown up without knowing her father's real story because he'd been too afraid to fight back. But watching Daniel demean Rosana for the crime of being human, something crystallized in Andrew's mind. Silence wasn't protection. It was cowardice. "Yes," Andrew said quietly, walking toward Daniel's table. "You know me." The restaurant had gone quiet in that way spaces do when violence feels imminent. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway in mouths. Even the kitchen sound seemed to fade, as if the entire building was leaning in to listen. Daniel squinted at Andrew, his mind clearly racing through a mental database of faces. And then, like a computer finally finishing a complex calculation, understanding dawned. His face went pale, then flushed red. Andrew Shaw. He said the name like it tasted rotten. "I heard you crawled into some hole and died. Guess the rumors were exaggerated. I changed my name to Justice. Seemed appropriate, given what you stole from me." Andrew's hands were at his sides, but his knuckles had gone white against the dark fabric of his jeans. 23 years of suppressed rage was pressing against his ribcage, demanding release. But rage wasn't what came out. Instead, something colder, more precise. "You framed me for insider trading," Andrew said, his voice carrying to every corner of the diner. "You fabricated emails, planted false evidence, and destroyed my career because I wouldn't sign off on your scheme to defraud Morrison Financial's pension fund." Daniel laughed, but it sounded forced, mechanical. "That's ancient history. And if I remember correctly, the investigation found you guilty." "The investigation found me guilty because you buried the real evidence and bought off the right people." Andrew took another step closer. The 2 junior executives at Daniel's table were trying to make themselves invisible, pressing back into their seats. "My wife left me. My daughter grew up thinking her father was a criminal. I lost everything while you built your empire on other people's ruins." Rosana stood frozen, the water pitcher still in her hand, watching this drama unfold. She'd started this shift thinking about rent, and ended up in the middle of what felt like a movie scene. But Andrew wasn't finished. He turned to address the restaurant at large, his voice steady and clear. This man built Shaw Acquisitions on fraud, insider deals, and crushing companies that employed thousands of people. He spent 2 decades presenting himself as a titan of industry, but the foundation is corpses. You can't prove any of that, Daniel said, but his voice had lost its swagger. He was looking around the restaurant, calculating the damage to his reputation, the phone cameras that were undoubtedly recording. Actually, I can. Andrew pulled out his phone, his movements deliberate. I spent 23 years quietly gathering evidence. Every shady deal, every bribed official, every manipulated audit. I have emails, recordings, financial documents. I've been building a case file that could send you to prison for the next 20 years. This was a lie. Andrew had no such evidence. But Daniel didn't know that, and the way his face drained of color suggested he had enough skeletons in his closet to believe it was true. Why now? Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. Why wait this long? Andrew glanced back at Lily, who was watching with a mixture of confusion and pride. Because I was protecting my daughter. I didn't want her growing up watching her father wage war. But she's old enough now to understand that some fights are worth having. He turned back to Daniel. And because I just watched you treat another human being like garbage for your own amusement, and I realize that staying silent makes me complicit. The silence in the diner was absolute now, broken only by the hum of the refrigerators in the kitchen. Daniel looked around at the faces watching him, at the phones recording his humiliation, at the monument to his ego crumbling in real time. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked. Andrew pointed to Rosana, who was still standing there, caught in this unexpected crossfire of old grievances. Apologize to her. Look her in the eye and acknowledge that she's a human being worthy of respect, that her work has value, that her mistake doesn't define her worth. Daniel's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. His pride was warring with his survival instinct, and for a long moment, it wasn't clear which would win. Then, slowly, he turned to Rosana. "I apologize," he said, the words sounding like they were being extracted with pliers. "I was out of line." "Look at her when you say it," Andrew commanded. Daniel raised his eyes to meet Rosana's. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the cheap butterfly clip holding back her hair, the name tag that read Rosana in faded letters. He could see, perhaps for the first time in years, an actual human being instead of a service automaton. "I'm sorry," he said again, and this time it sounded almost genuine. "I was cruel, and you didn't deserve that." Rosana nodded slowly, not sure what else to do. Andrew leaned in close to Daniel, his voice dropping so only the two of them could hear. "You get one chance. Clean up your business practices. Make restitution to the people you've hurt. Do it quietly, do it thoroughly, or I release everything I have to the SEC, the FBI, and every media outlet in the country." "You're bluffing," Daniel said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Try me." Andrew's smile was cold as winter wind. "I've waited 23 years. I can wait as long as it takes." What would Daniel do with this ultimatum? And would Andrew really have the evidence to back up his threat? Listen, if you've made it this far in the story, you're invested. You want to know what happens next. But here's the thing. Most people scroll past these stories without subscribing. They watch, they enjoy, and they disappear. If this story matters to you, if you actually care how it ends, hit that subscribe button, please. It takes 2 seconds. And if you don't, you'll probably forget about this channel and never hear any other amazing stories from me. Daniel Shaw left Miller's Diner that night, like a man walking to his own execution. His junior executives had already slipped out during the confrontation, unwilling to be associated with his public humiliation. The other diners watched him go in silence, and only after the door closed behind him did the normal sounds of conversation slowly resume. Andrew stood in the middle of the restaurant, adrenaline draining from his system like water from a punctured bucket, leaving him shaky and uncertain. He just detonated a bomb in the middle of his carefully constructed life, and he wasn't entirely sure what the fallout would be. Rosana approached him carefully, as if he might spook. "I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. You don't owe me anything." Andrew's voice was gentle now, the steel gone from it. "I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of that. Are you really going to expose him?" She was studying his face, trying to read the truth there. Andrew hesitated. "Honestly, I don't have any evidence. I made it all up." He laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "But he doesn't know that, and based on how quickly he folded, I'm betting there's plenty to find if anyone goes looking." Rosana processed this, then smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "That's either really brave or really stupid. Probably both." Andrew glanced back at Lily, who was still in the booth, watching this exchange with the focused intensity only children possess. "I should get my daughter home. It's way past her bedtime." "Wait." Rosana touched his arm, a gesture so brief it might have been accidental. "I finished my shift in 30 minutes. Would you want to stay? Have some coffee? I feel like I should at least buy you a piece of pie or something for what you just did." Andrew looked at this woman, really looked at her for the first time. Her cheap butterfly clip, her worn apron, her hands had finally stopped shaking. He saw someone center the universe, just like Lily was his, and he realized that for 23 years, he'd been so focused on hiding from his past that he'd forgotten how to be present in his actual life. "I'd like that," he said. 40 minutes later, after Lily had fallen asleep in the booth with Andrew's jacket as a pillow, he and Rosana sat across from each other with coffee that had gone lukewarm. The restaurant was empty now except for them and the night manager doing paperwork in the back. "Can I ask you something?" Rosana said, tracing patterns in a coffee spill with her finger. "Why did you really speak up? I mean, I'm grateful, but you could have just ignored the whole thing." Andrew considered the question. "Do you know what the worst part about what he did to me was? It wasn't losing my career or my marriage. It was teaching myself to stay invisible, to never make waves, to accept injustice because fighting back was too dangerous." He met her eyes. "Tonight, watching him degrade you, I realized I'd become exactly what he wanted. Someone too afraid to stand up." "That's a heavy burden to carry," Rosana said quietly. "What about you? Why do you do this?" Andrew gestured at the diner. "You're smart, articulate. You could probably do something that pays better, treats you better." Rosana laughed, but there was an edge to it. You sound like my ex-husband. He used to say I was wasting my potential. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I like this work. I like meeting people, hearing their stories. Yeah, the pay isn't great and the hours are brutal, but I'm good at it. And until tonight, I didn't realize how much I'd started to believe that being good at this work made me somehow less than. For what it's worth, Andrew said, what you do matters. The world needs people who show up, do honest work, and treat others with dignity. That's worth more than whatever Shaw has in his bank account. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily in that way it sometimes does between people who've unexpectedly shared something intense. Rosana told him about her son in college, the one she was putting to school on her own. Andrew told her about Lily's struggles with math and his own struggles with being both mother and father to her. When the night manager finally kicked him out at closing time, they stood in the parking lot under the fluorescent lights, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Would it be weird if I asked for your number? Rosana said, then immediately looked mortified. God, that sounded like a line. I just meant. I'd like that, Andrew interrupted, smiling. Really? They exchanged numbers, and as Andrew carried a sleeping Lily to his car, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. Not the carefully controlled, risk-averse possibility of his life as Andrew Justice, but the wild, dangerous possibility of actually living instead of just surviving. But across town, Daniel Shaw was making calls of his own, and the consequences of Andrew's stand were only beginning to unfold. 3 days later, Andrew's phone rang at 6 a.m. He answered it in that confused state between sleep and waking, his voice rough. Mr. Justice? This is Detective Maria Gonzalez with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need you to come down to the station to answer some questions. Andrew sat up, suddenly wide awake. Questions about what? It's regarding allegations of blackmail and extortion made against you by Daniel Shaw. So that's how Shaw was playing it. Andrew felt his blood run cold. He'd been naive to think a man like Shaw would simply accept humiliation and move on. Of course, he would weaponize the legal system. It's what powerful men did best. I'll be there in an hour, Andrew said. The police station smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. Detective Gonzalez turned out to be a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She led Andrew to an interview room and laid out the accusation. Shaw claimed Andrew had threatened him with false evidence, demanding money to keep quiet about fabricated crimes. Is this true? Gonzalez asked. Andrew chose his words carefully. I confronted Daniel Shaw in a public restaurant about real crimes he committed against me 23 years ago. I did say I had evidence, which was an exaggeration, but I never asked him for money. I asked him to apologize to a waitress he was humiliating. Can anyone corroborate that? About 30 people. It happened in a crowded diner. Andrew pulled out his phone and showed her Rosana's number. Start with her. She was a waitress. Gonzalez made a note. Shaw says you've been stalking him, that this confrontation was part of a long-term harassment campaign. I hadn't seen Daniel Shaw in 23 years before that night. It was pure coincidence that we ended up in the same restaurant. Andrew felt the familiar weight of injustice settling over him. He's doing to me now exactly what he did to me then, using his money and connections to manipulate the system. That's a serious accusation. And I can't prove it, which is exactly how he operates. Andrew leaned forward. Look, I know how this looks. Disgraced ex-finance guy confronts former colleague, makes threats. But talk to the witnesses. Check Shaw's history. You'll find a pattern. Gonzalez studied him for a long moment. Wait here. She left, and Andrew sat in the windowless room, wondering how he'd managed to go from hero to criminal in 72 hours. Through the door, he could hear muffled voices, phones ringing, the machinery of justice grinding away with no guarantee of arriving at truth. An hour later, Gonzalez returned with a different expression on her face. Your story checks out. Multiple witnesses confirmed Shaw was verbally abusing the waitress. Several recorded the incident on their phones. And she paused. When we started looking into Shaw's business practices, we found some irregularities that are very interesting to some people downtown. Andrew felt relief wash over him like a wave. So I'm free to go? You're free to go. But Mr. Justice? Gonzalez fixed him with meaningful look. If you really do have evidence of Shaw's crimes, now would be a good time to share it. We have enough to start an investigation, but documentation would help. I told you I was bluffing. Then maybe you should stop bluffing and start looking. A man doesn't react the way Shaw did unless he has something to hide. She handed him her card. Call me if you find anything. When Andrew finally left the police station, his phone had 17 missed calls. 5 from Lily's school, 12 from Rosana. He called the school first. Lily had asked to speak to the counselor that morning, worried because her dad had left early and seemed upset. She was fine now, but they wanted him to come in. He called Rosana next. Are you okay? She asked immediately. The police came to the diner, asking questions about Shaw. I told them everything I saw. Did I do the right thing? You did exactly the right thing. Thank you. Andrew's voice was thick with emotion. Rosana, I'm sorry you got dragged further into this. Shaw is trying to turn me into the villain, and... Stop, she interrupted. You stood up for me when no one else would. Whatever happens with Shaw, that doesn't change. You're not the villain in this story. After he hung up, Andrew sat in his car in the police station parking lot, processing the last 3 days. He'd broken 23 years of silence, nearly gotten arrested, and dragged both his daughter and a near stranger into his mess. But he'd also stopped being a ghost in his own life. The question was, what came next? 3 months later, Andrew stood in Lincoln Park on a Saturday afternoon, watching Lily and Rosana spread a picnic blanket under an oak tree. The autumn leaves were turning gold and red, and the air had that perfect temperature where you could wear a light jacket without being too hot or too cold. Daniel Shaw was in jail, awaiting trial on charges of securities fraud, embezzlement, and about a dozen other financial crimes. It turned out that once investigators started looking, they found decades of wrongdoing buried in shell companies and offshore accounts. Andrew's confrontation had simply provided the spark, and in a twist nobody saw coming, the investigation had uncovered the original evidence of Shaw's framed job 23 years ago. Andrew's name had been cleared, his reputation restored. Several of his former colleagues had reached out with apologies and job offers, but Andrew had turned them all down. "Dad, come on." Lily called, waving him over. Rosana brought the cookies she promised. Andrew joined them, settling onto the blanket. Rosana had indeed brought cookies, homemade chocolate chip that were still slightly warm. Lily grabbed one immediately and pronounced it better than restaurant cookies, which was high praise from a 9-year-old. "So," Rosana said, pouring lemonade into plastic cups, "have you decided about the job offer?" She was referring to the position Andrew had been offered at Morrison Financial. Not just any position, but Vice President of Ethics and Compliance. The company wanted him to help rebuild its integrity after years of corruption. Good pay, impressive title, chance to make a real difference. "I decided to turn it down," Andrew said. Both Lily and Rosana looked at him in surprise. "But, Dad, that's such a good job." Lily protested. "It is," Andrew agreed. "But I spent 23 years proving I was the kind of person who deserved that job. I don't need to prove it anymore." He looked at Rosana. "I'm thinking about teaching. Maybe high school business classes, or helping at-risk kids learn financial literacy. Something that matters more than moving money around for people who already have too much." Rosana smiled, the same transformative smile he'd first seen in the diner. "That sounds perfect for you. What about you?" Andrew asked. "Last I heard, the owner of Miller's Diner offered you the night manager position." "I took it," Rosana said. 20% pay raise, actual benefits, and I get to make the schedule, which means—" She glanced at Lily, then back at Andrew. "I might have more free time for things like this." She gestured at the blanket, the park, the three of them together on a Saturday afternoon. Lily, oblivious to the undercurrent of adult conversation, was climbing the oak tree with the fearlessness of youth. She called down to them, "Hey, from up here I can see the whole park. It's like being a bird." Andrew watched his daughter, backlit by autumn sun, and felt something settle in his chest. Peace, maybe, or just the simple satisfaction of being exactly where he was supposed to be. "You know what's funny?" he said to Rosana. "That night in the diner, I stood up thinking I was finally confronting my past. But really I was stumbling into my future. Pretty significant stumble," Rosana observed. "The best ones usually are." Andrew leaned back on his elbows, watching clouds drift across the sky. "I used to think the remainder, the part that doesn't fit neatly, was something to be ashamed of, the messy bits that complicate the clean narrative. And now I think the remainder is where real life happens." He looked at Rosana, at Lily climbing down from the tree, at the imperfect, complicated, beautiful afternoon unfolding around them. Everything that matters exists in the spaces between expected outcomes. Rosana reached over and squeezed his hand, a gesture that was becoming familiar. "So what happens now?" Andrew smiled. "I don't know, and that's the best part." Lily returned to the blanket, slightly muddy and completely happy. "Can we come back here next week?" she asked. "I want to climb all the trees in this park." "Only if Rosana wants to," Andrew said. "I think I can make time in my schedule," Rosana said, her eyes meeting Andrew's with a warmth that suggested their future was full of more than just park visits. As the afternoon stretched into evening, the three of them talked and laughed and simply existed together. Andrew realized that for the first time in 23 years, he wasn't performing Andrew justice, the man who'd rebuilt himself from ruins. He wasn't running from Andrew Shaw, the disgraced finance professional. He was just Andrew, sitting on a picnic blanket with people who saw him clearly and chose to be there anyway. And the remainder, the messy, complicated, imperfect part that didn't fit into anyone's predetermined equation, turned out to be the only part worth keeping. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. Kindly support what I do here by subscribing. And then drop in the comment section if you like part 2 of Andrew, Rosana, and Lily's story. What challenges will they face as this new connection deepens? How will they deal with Shaw's continued legal battles affecting their lives? Let me know if you want to hear more.